Good morning or good evening, wherever you may be in the world, my friends. Alan Clements here from Blessed Ubud, Bali, Indonesia, June 15th, I think, 2020. I've been up since 3 a.m., just deeply immersed, saturated in my psychedelic, revealing the meaning of this film that I'm writing, obsessed with. I like being obsessed. Raw War, and it's just reforming hour by hour. It's just quite fascinating to be in this process. And I'm really enjoying the catharsis, my own catharsis, to keep at bay, to use a Nick Cave line, pushing the sky away with these daily dispatches from the existential crazy soul of our consciousness everywhere. So thank you for tuning in. Today, a little bit more about yesterday and a little bit more about today. Relativity, perspective, and the great unknown. I've been bringing up people like Galileo, Giorgino Bruno, the Italian astronomer, the gentleman who, I don't know if it's an oxymoron to put it together, discovered infinity, that woke to infinite context, inside and outside, everywhere, always, every day. I mean, pretty rad to think that geocentrism, Earth-centered existence, was the priority of civilized human mathematics and science and intellectual thought for 1,400 years, 2 AD up until 1,400 years past that. It's quite miraculous to think that we believed in a fixed Earth. Talk about the origins of patriarchy, domination and denigration, the hierarchy of centrality. And I've spoken about, as we all know, the persecution of the state of mind called loyalty to critical thinking, loyalty to discernment, loyalty to interdependence, loyalty to freedom of thought, loyalty to freedom of speech. When Giorgio Bruno, Galileo, both persecuted by the four walls of the Roman Catholic Church, that orthodoxy, that genocidal orthodoxy that killed, burned, persecuted the feminine, the woman, embodied savant, because they dared to feel and to think out of the prison camp of dogma, orthodoxy, indoctrination on the terms of the male, the patriarchy. And Mr. Bruno, tortured, burned alive, upside down with his tongue cut out by the hierarchy of the church, the leading theologians in the world at that point, at least in Europe, not in Asia, not the indigenous cultures, but in the sophisticated, evil Europe at the time, not unlike today, worldwide, where we see the global elites, the Davosians, the oligarchs, whether they be in any basement or sewer in the world. And this good and evil dynamic is about orthodoxy, obedience, persecution, censorship, violation, incarceration, diminishment, cancellation, evaporation of existence. You don't exist in the social credit score of you don't behave according to the church, the man, the orthodoxy, the cult of a government gone toxic, totalitarianism, right? Following me. We've had examples of where cancellation culture started, of course, way back with Jesus and unconscious Pilate. And what is this truth that you speak of? And Jesus is said to have stayed silent. And he's thrown to the wolves. This sense of human betrayal, betrayal of nature, betrayal of conscience, betrayal of one's own decency, one's own self-honesty. How deep I've seen in my own mind how denial, and at times when I wake up from the cult of self-deception, I look back and say, oh my God, Alan, you thought that what you were thinking and doing was completely right. You did not have any regard at all that it could have been an aberrant emotion that was projecting that false truth as an illusion, and you believed it to be true. Wake up, Mr. Self-deceiving self of your own egoic narcissism. Every one of us are capable of what we judge, right? To state the obvious, but easily unseen. And I think of my friend Aung San Suu Kyi, alone in a prison cell in some undisclosed dungeon of an Orwellian evil terrorist, yet again, another guy gone mad in Burma, where he's just so afraid of the woman. An attractive, soulful, educated, heartfelt mother. He's just so intimidated by that interpretation of, I can't control her. I'm afraid of honoring her because intrinsically I'm unaware of my conditioning as a toxic, sicko, patriarchally driven, going to be soon tyrant, world's foremost terrorist. I can't deal with a person I can't control, especially if she's embodied as a woman. And so my friend Aung San Suu Kyi, along with 13,000 other prisoners of conscience, are being tortured. I read today in the news, the underground news, of how they're being violated, tortured, belittled, raped, starved, put into cells, maximum of 60 people, without blankets, without pillows, without mosquito nets, without water, without buckets, without drinking water. They're saying they're even forced to drink the toilet water. How inhuman is that from the terrorists in Burma? We don't hear about these people. We coexist with them. But that four walls of that orthodoxy, the cult of totalitarianism known as religion, the church, that did Mr. Bruno in, that did Galileo in, that did all the women in, that are doing the women and the boys and the girls and some of the men right now. No one thinks about the Uyghurs in China, the 2.5 Tibetans that are continually persecuted by the CCP, the Chinese Communist, toxic, patriarchally driven, totalitarian anti-party. Not the people of China, not the Lao Baojings, not the people. Big distinction. And we coexist with this craziness. And I keep asking myself, what do you see when you look at the light? And I brought up Mr. Newton yesterday. In the early 1600s, it said, a young mathematician, astronomer, where at Oxford University, had a passion to study light. How cool is that? You don't often hear people that study light. Put a hole in a blind to narrow the band of the clear light coming into a darkened room, and held up a refraction, and he was right. His theory was right. It exposed that light is actually a spectrum of color. how many colors? 6 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red. 6 colors in the spectrum. And we're using that in a way to highlight the colors of consciousness. Because if we don't really look at the light rightly, we assume that what we see is actually light, but it actually is tremendous color. And we live in a box-shaped, narrow world in which we deny color, not just color, but diversity, spectrum, uniqueness. And within that band of color, I don't know exactly how many colors there are, but I think I vaguely remember when I studied my own dive into light and color, there was something like 10 million colors in the spectrum. What was that? Like 1,000 levels of light and dark that can be perceived, and 100 dimensions of yellow and blue, and 100 of red and green, and I think 1,000 times 100 times 100 equals 100 million. And I think ultimately that is what can be seen. Imagine 100 million spectrums of color. Is that the enlightened mind? Is that the divine feminine coming through? To be able to so honor uniqueness and diversity and gradation and nuance and the poetry of those colors interrelating without a real clear distinction, yet they're distinct enough to see they're distinct. Look at every human being, every animal, every tree, the distinctions of colors, and yet we denigrate. We want to create apartheid and racism and ageism and all the ways in which we discriminate against diversity, rather than learning to coexist, the sacred. What does it mean to coexist with unlimited spectrum? And the high order to play with spectrum is to create within this color spectrum beautiful works of heart and art and soul that illuminate other people waking up from how they see light, the narrowness of the light, the dogma of the light, the anti-prism. And I'm thinking back if I were in the room with Mr. Newton and I was a non-color spectrum person, and I was one of the savants and intellectuals and leading authorities at the time brought in, and I would go like, oh my God, what is this man? Is he a Houdini? Is he a magician? How did he create these colors out of this clear angled thing called a prism? Others would go, oh, no, 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 no. You can't be doing that with light. It could have done a Bruno or a Galileo, a persecution of those who reveal the true nature of a circumstance, the true nature of light. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Think of all those different names. Persians, Muslims, Christians, Burmese, Rohingya, Karens, Shans, Kachins, Russians, Ukrainians, Syrians, Iraqis, Libyans. How many different nationalities of all of the humanoid, and how many species of animals and birds and fish? 200, they say, going extinct by the day. Diversity, a love of uniqueness and diversity and creativity. Let me end today. How well do we devote ourselves to looking into the light and seeing the spectrum of color, and then expanding that ability to see the gradations of light and the gradations of color, and to begin to honor that in a way that really supports our respect for diversity, which to me is the source of harmlessness and nonviolence. Freedom of speech to me, is the honoring of diversity of speech. Freedom of expression is honoring the diversity of expression. Freedom of the media and across all frontiers is honoring that people have the right to communicate the evidence of their own beliefs and their own thoughts as nonviolently as possible. We get to create satire and humor and music and song. Freedom of speech everywhere. Coexisting with joy that people still have a voice, that they have it in them to speak up. The quelling, the crushing, the cancellation of speech today. Will our children be born mute, deaf, dumb, without vocal cords because of the biological relationship between the cancellation of freedom and speech and the muzzling of action to put people into the four walls of a completely claustrophobic social distancing from reality? We must fight back. We must defy these standards of tyranny. We must convene. We must unmask. We must live. We must travel. We must make love. We must create babies. We must protect the environment. We must elevate nature. We must plant seeds. We must make songs. We must make music. We must do everything to keep alive the radiance of the 30 articles of the Declaration of Human Rights, the spectrum of human conscience and dignity and freedom. I'll close the freedom spectrum. What are those elements? What are the colors of freedom in our lives? Compassion, dignity, loving kindness, creativity, authenticity, integrity, moral courage, patience, caring, fortitude, determination, equanimity, eroticism, relational awakening. So from my heart to yours, thank you for being in my life. God willing, see you tomorrow at some point in my morning. I'm trying to navigate the ambient sound, but I'm getting into the spirit of celebrating it, and I hope you will with me. So have a beautiful day, and thank you for being part of my life.